We're going to talk a little bit about fermentation and the benefits of fermentation. I got two books in front of me right here. One is the Permaculture Book of Fermentation and Human Nutrition by Bill Mollison, and the other one is Wild Fermentation by Salvador Katz. Now, I'm going to admit right up front, I've got milk in my refrigerator that's more than a month old. It's been in there for more than a month. It's no longer milk. It's now a culture. And that's very important for a number of reasons. First off, I'm Justin Hitt from Prosperity Homestead. When we have situations of food scarcity, or we have limited refrigeration, or we want to get additional nutrients out of our food, fermentation is a path we can take. And I mentioned I have milk in my refrigerator that was purchased more than several months ago. So there's a jar in there, and it's a pretty large jar, and it's a half gallon basically. And I pour milk in and I pour milk out, and it's fermenting in what's called kefir. Now, I don't have actual kefir grains in there. I've just continuously brewed this kefir, and I use it for making pancakes. When it separates the whey, which is the clear liquid, makes my pancakes nice and fluffy. If I mix the materials up and I use it in my yeast fermentation for bread, I can use less dry yeast and still get a nice textured bread. But essentially, I'm fermenting milk, and as long as I feed this culture, it will continue to stay healthy. Now, you do have to observe it and be aware that if it changes any color other than white, it's okay to be chunky. It's okay to smell a little odd, but if it changes any color than white, it's no good. But there are many ways to preserve milk. You can make yogurts. Right here on page 75 of the Wild Fermentation book, it talks about making yogurt itself. Yogurt is a type of a microbial activity that has solidified the milk, and then it's dehydrated into a kind of a creamy, basically a creamy organism of lactobacillus, streptococcus, thermophilus, and very other mixes. But it's kind of pasteurized at 110 degrees, so it's not going to be shelf stable, but it increases the gut biome and increases the digestive enzymes and things that you wouldn't normally get from just plain milk. There's all kinds of different things. Cheeses, you can solidify the milk using a different process by adding an acid to a warm milk. It starts chunking up, and then you can strain it out at different stages to make different kinds of cheeses. The key here is, let's not let things go to waste. Let's find out the ancient ways in which food was preserved without electricity, without sometimes a lot of effort, in order to make new and quality, nutritious products. So the kefir itself that I have is the source. We drink it directly. We use it in baking. And baking does kill off a lot of the beneficial the lactobacillus and all that other stuff. But overall, it is health. It is a reconnection with raw foods, with quality foods, with fermentation. Now, what else can you ferment? Well, I have kombucha in the house, and that requires a little bit of maintenance. But kombucha takes tea, and through a bacterial fungal relationship, the mother turns that into a sparkling drink that is good for your digestion. Now, what you'll notice about a lot of these things is that the fermentation process frees up nutrients in foods to make them more digestible. I make sauerkraut, for example. That's cabbage. If you just take a leaf of cabbage and start chewing on it and eating on a piece of cabbage, it really doesn't have... First off, it's very fibrous. It doesn't digest well. It might be crunchy and have some juices in it, but that material pulp really doesn't benefit you. You kind of just chew it up and spit it out. You can cook cabbage, of course, but once you've cooked the cabbage, it has a very short shelf life. But if you shred that cabbage, salt it, and then put it in water, making sure that all the cabbage stays submerged under the water, in about a week or so, it'll start fermenting a little bit, And you may be asking, well, what is fermenting? Well, again, it's the soil biome that has crawled up the plant leaves, that doesn't really wash off easily. Shredded up, it's the creatures inside the plant that are now fermenting. And after maybe 2 or 3 weeks, you're going to have a vinegary, very easy to eat and digest sauerkraut. Miso, for example. Miso is excellent, and there's a number of ways to make miso, but it could be green bean paste. So we get you could do miso with soybeans. You could also do miso with green beans. And so what we did is we fermented the green beans. These aren't green beans like you'd pick in the garden. These are a Chinese type of bean that's in the similar family as soybean. But you soak the beans, rinse them a couple times, and then soak them in a jar for a couple weeks, and they will ferment, and they'll smell like fermented beans, which to me is not a bad smell. It's an earthy smell. And then those beans can be mixed with, after they're drained, they can be mixed with hot chilies, sesame oil, different types of herbs, and then ground up into a paste that can be used to cook food as a seasoning for pork, for example. There's ways of fermenting meat. Now, I have not fermented meat in my own home. I tend to ferment vegetables, mushrooms, daikon radishes. I've done a number of videos. Daikon radishes, we'll dry them, we'll ferment them. My mouth is watering just thinking about this because the flavor is so deep and rich and tasty. And then to know that you can get a radish, for example, daikon radishes, we use them in cover crops, and they break up the soil, and you pull out this giant radish, and to know that you can transform that giant radish that grows in the spring or in the summer into a nutritious and tasty food that you can have during the winter, or you can even have it years later. Now, it's not necessary to save the food for so long. If you're storing food and it's there for 2 or 3 years, it's probably too long. I just took out some black beans that were a little bit dusty because they were probably in there for maybe 2 years, and that's not ideal. But again, extending the life of the food. So if you have an abundance of harvest, and that's what tends to happen when we use permaculture techniques and we use the regenerative farming that we talk about here at Prosperity Homestead, the prosperity and abundance grows, the food security is there, and now you end up with 30, 40 heads of cabbage. What are you going to do with it? Well, you can ferment the cabbage into sauerkraut. If you don't like sauerkraut, you can ferment it with beans and make an Asian-style dish. You can ferment it with radishes and chili peppers, add some chili powder, and make kimchi, a Korean dish. But the daikon radish is so exciting because when it grows so big, and it can ferment as little as 8 days, and it can stay as long as 12 or 15 days in a container. I've kept stuff in containers for 6 months, and it's still been really good and edible. But when you take it out, dry it off, slice it really thin, saute it in some hot oil with some chilies, it makes a great little side dish that gives a pop of flavor of what your main dish is. You can have it on the side with some meat, kind of a chutney, kind of a relish. But again, what kind of root crops can you ferment? So I'm on page 76 of Bill Mollison's Fermentation and Human Nutrition. Arrowroot, pickled beets, camas bulbs, garlic. Oh my gosh, fermenting garlic makes such an incredibly good tasting garlic sauce. You can ferment potatoes to make vodka. I tried it a couple times. It's a little bit harder than it seems, but it's worth it. Horseradish to make wasabi. General radishes in general can be fermented. I fermented a lot of these things in here. I don't really know. They don't really grow in a temperate climate, but I fermented the leaves off of taro, and they need to, now the leaves off of taro are astringent, so you can't just eat them straight out. So some of these things that you ferment, you're going to then use in another dish. But the taro leaf itself, you can use it to wrap meat when you're steaming the meat, you can ferment the vegetable and then flip meat in it to get it all over the meat, and then either put it in a steamed dish or a cooked dish. It has to be cooked. I fermented bamboo shoots. Bamboo shoots are excellent to be dried, fermented, pickled with a little bit of vinegar and some sesame oil. Again, there's a variety of ways to approach this, and the key is we're going to extend the life of our food throughout the seasons while adding additional nutritional value, as well as adding flavor and excitement throughout the year. One of the ways it's good for this is sauces. Tomato sauce, everybody knows about ketchup. Well, tomato sauce is simply a fermented ketchup. Now, today we add vinegar to it. We don't have the benefit of the fermentation. When something ferments, so if you take tomatoes and you clean them up and you put them in, you dice them up, everything, put them in some liquids and salt. The salt kills the bad bacterias, but allows the good bacterias, the stomach enzymes, that kind of stuff, to ferment up. As that ferments, tomatoes will sometimes turn into a little bit of wine, but first they'll go through a stage where they're very vinegary. And then at that stage, you can drain the water, puree them, and literally have ketchup. Now, a lot of folks will add brown sugar to their ketchup. They'll add ginger. They'll add a little bit of vinegar, because you can shortcut some of these with a little bit of vinegar to get that flavor right. Because I will admit, some fermented foods smell like garbage, but they taste just fine. And there's different ways of doing tomato ketchup. Worcestershire sauce is fermented soybean, just with different seasoning in it. Tabasco sauce is chilies and tomatoes fermented. We make a number of hot sauces here. We'll ferment chilies for months, and then drain all the water off of them. Mix them with a little bit more salt, a little bit of soy sauce. Mix it with some hot oil and just keep sauteing it until everything is kind of pulpy and kind of broken down. And then we'll end up with a chili oil that can be spooned out. Keep it in the refrigerator, but it can be spooned out and put on dishes. It's extremely tasty. But again, the value of fermentation is to extend the season. You can ferment eggs. You can store eggs underwater. You can ferment different types of things and then dry them. Now, again, the fermentation, your fermented greens, your fermented radishes, your cabbage, those are going to be covered with enzymes that are going to help your digestive system. They're going to help your overall emotional stability. They add flavor to the dish. They reduce the fibrous nature of some of these vegetables, and they just add value. Now, when you ferment fruits, they actually produce more alcohols because the sugars will convert into alcohols, and so you can have a flavorful a cordial or some other types of alcohol drinks. So rice fermented, for example, makes sake, and that is a tasty dish. You can pair the fermented fruits. A lot of times you can ferment a citrus fruit with your apples, peaches, pears, and get a kind of a refreshing alcohol out of that. Berries can be fermented. I do like drying things, so that's another way of preserving food. And so there are fermented sausages that are actually dried. Now, I've had these freshly made, and you'd think that stuffing a bunch of seasoned pork into an intestine and then hanging it up to dry while it's fermenting would be not that tasty, but it turns out it's very good. Now, in the United States, we have such a quick culture of just going to a grocery store and buying something. We also tend to have pretty reliable power, so we don't often need to store things without refrigeration. But I would encourage you to pick up these two books. There probably is a link in the description. It's probably not going to be an affiliate link because these books are just, they're available everywhere. But the Permaculture Book of Fermentation and Human Nutrition by Bill Mollison and Wild Fermentation by Sandro Katz are two highly recommended books to sit down and just try the recipes. It's like making bread. It takes a little bit of effort, a little bit of timing to get these things right, but the experience, the culture, the interaction around the food, the seasonality of the food makes it all that more tasty. And now my mouth is watering because I'm just reminded of how flavorful and how nutritious and how in the depths of winter. So we have 4 seasons here in the Mid-Atlantic region. In the depths of winter, I can go on the shelf down in the pantry, take something off, whether it's dried goods or it's a fermented kimchi, for example, and enjoy some of that with my dish. It livens up the dish. It makes it more exciting. And that's what we want for you. I'm Justin Hitt with Prosperity Homestead. I hope this has been a useful introduction into fermentation. And when you open my refrigerator, maybe you won't be so disgusted by all the weird jars of stuff. But again, we're making alcohols. We're making flavored drinks and punches like the kombucha, the fermented liquids that we can use in baking, and all kinds of excitement. And I hope you'll investigate that. Again, 2 great books, Wild Fermentation by Sandro Katz and the Permaculture book of Fermentation and Human Nutrition by Bill Mollison. Explore the world. You will find incredibly flavorful beverages, foods, nature, and it is about culture. It is about understanding where these food traditions come from. It's about connecting with your community and understanding what foods are great and what foods are not, and what foods are helpful and what foods are not, and then extending the season itself. If you have any questions about what we covered here today, or you have a topic that you'd like to hear me talk about, visit us at www.prosperityhomestead.org. Go to the contact page, ask your questions. There we have a free newsletter and other resources to help you get more from your land. Your land, when you understand these things, will be filled with abundance. When you recognize the mushrooms and you know how to prepare the vegetables and the fermentation and the local milk, life transforms. And I want to hear about your success in those areas as we take you there and help you make your homestead prosperous.